So I was really struck, like most people were, I think, by Nicole Hannah-Jones' decision to turn down her alma mater, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and go to Howard University, a historically Black college. I think folks from Howard would like me to say the most premier historically Black college that we have, I'm sure. But it reminded me of this tension that I think exists for all African American academics. Do you fit in enough at predominantly white universities, or are you more comfortable going to a place where some of the challenges that you certainly face at predominantly white institutions don't exist? Talk just a little about how you handle that tension.
Yes. So, Stephen, it's been about, 50 years, with the civil rights movement. We have federal law that protects us in terms of employment discrimination, but we're still having challenges. And so the situation with Nicole Hannah-Jones, it resonates with me as a Black woman on the tenure track at a historically white serving institution. As Black people, we represent about 13% of the US population. We're maybe 6% in the academy. And so, the same sort of challenges that we see on the news that are happening in everyday society, myself and others encounter those challenges, being questioned, being isolated, really feeling as though you don't belong, or that you have to work twice as hard. And so, even though many of these institutions have made a commitment, including UNC Chapel Hill, to increase diversity, inclusion, the societal challenges that have not been addressed, we all still face them.
Yeah. So talk about the ways in which tenure, which is academic gold, right? It's what everybody in the academy really wants. Talk about the ways in which it plays out differently for African Americans than it does for others. I mean, I think, obviously the discrimination that exists in society is not, doesn't leave itself at the university doors. But talk about the ways that you see race and racism affecting decisions like who gets tenure.
Yes. So, so for starters, in terms of the makeup of the tenure and promotion committees, historically white serving institutions, they are mainly comprised of white individuals. And if they don't have a type of racial literacy around the experiences, the unique experiences, I would say, of Black faculty, they can purposely or unintentionally fall into this notion of questioning whether our work is quality or if we're a good fit. And those types of concepts, while on the surface, they seem like, they wouldn't, cause any harm, they can't. As the only Black woman in my program, I'm very well aware. And, fortunately for me, several of my white colleagues, they do have a racial literacy. So they do recognize, sometimes when students write things on my evaluations that don't have anything to do with my teaching, but maybe more so about the way I look, or, a comment about, maybe me not seeming friendly, which is a stereotype that can be placed upon Black women if we don't smile, if we're not catering. And of course, all those expectations are, connected to historical notions of, seeing Black women as caretakers and mammies and those types of things. So, another thing with the tenure and promotion committees is that, for those of us who go before them, we don't know about the conversations that are taking place about us. And so someone could, be motivated by discrimination to speak against me getting tenure. One, I wouldn't be able to defend myself because those meetings are typically private and confidential. And then how do I defend myself anyway against someone who has a discriminatory perspective about me as a Black woman? So it's just some of the challenges that we face in terms of when we go up for tenure, which of course, for those of us that are seeking tenure, that's a lifetime appointment where, we're no longer in a probationary period.
So I want to talk a little about the student experience too, which is affected, of course, by the makeup of faculty. I have an incredible amount of admiration for what Nikole Hannah-Jones did. She said, look, I'm going to go to a place where they value me, but also where they value African-American students. And that's great, but we still do need African-American academics to be at predominantly white institutions because A, there are African-American students there, but there are also white students who also need to have exposure to Black academics and Black thinking. There's a tension there that I think is kind of interesting in terms of, what's the right place? What's the right place for a Black academic in terms of making sure that students everywhere get that experience?
I agree. And, for me, Stephen, so I'm originally from the South. I'm from a family of educators. And so I've only known being educated and actually teaching in historically white serving institutions. And I agree with you, for those of us who are committed to social justice, like Nikole Hannah-Jones Project 1619, like those types of projects, and specifically for her to incorporate that into her teaching, that's for all students. We live in the US, we have this very mythical way of thinking about history. History is from, one particular perspective that's dominant. And, part of her project was to center the experiences of Black Americans to say, there's more to the story than what we get around, these white figures who, really have soiled past because many of them owned slaves or they weren't at the forefront advocating for the eradication of slavery and racism. So definitely, for me teaching at a historically white institution, it's my plan to continue doing that because I know that it not only benefits Black students, but all students benefit from knowing the truth about the work that we still need to do for the US to reach, this, what I consider to be right now, still a fantasy of being a place where equality and justice, dominate and where people feel like their dignity is affirmed. We're still in a place where we're striving for that.
And so when you make that decision, are you consigning yourself to a professional life of struggle? I mean, is it that you will never realize the kind of freedom or the kind of support that you might get at a historically Black college or university? Is it that your institution, in your mind, could never be what an historically Black college or university might be for you?
And so, Stephen, even when I think about HBCUs, and there was recently one of the faculty members at Howard who wrote an open letter to Nikole Hannah-Jones, letting her know that even Howard, the Mecca, has its own challenges with its treatment of faculty around pay and long-term contracts. And so, really for me, the type of work that I do and the areas that I study around law, higher education, and just US society, all institutions of higher education are working under a capitalistic system. And it doesn't lend itself to affirming people's humanity at its core. So, while I would absolutely love to work at a Howard University, would love to do that, I also recognize it has its own challenges. And so for me, I don't tell myself a story about what it means to be in the middle of Pennsylvania around a lot of people who don't look like me, but I'm not discouraged by that because, historically, when you think about Black educators who started off, they didn't even have the federal legislation that I have the benefit of. They worked in these institutions because, again, they believed that they could make a difference. I don't consider myself to be able to necessarily find quote unquote happiness, by what a historically white institution and all its bureaucracy will do. But I do find joy in teaching my students, all of my students, especially the ones that have social justice at the forefront of why they came to take my classes. So I'm encouraged by that.
Okay, Dr. LaWanda Ward of Penn State University. It was really great to have you here with us for this conversation on American Black Journal. Thanks for joining.
Thank you,